There is one big reason why you should be rooting for the Mets to make the playoffs this year, and I'm going to explain what it is on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code all in lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. I'm going to do something on today's show that I shouldn't have to. I'm going to explain why you should be rooting for the New York Mets right now, because as much as fans are always going to root for their team, and I still don't believe there really is a true Mets fan that turns on a game to watch and is rooting for a loss. There might be some of you out there, once you get past the trade deadline and you're thinking about draft positioning, but at this moment right now, if you are taking your time to tune into a Mets game, I'm imagining you're hoping that they win that game. But there's fans that aren't watching, and there's fans that have tuned out on this team. There's fans that, even though they are watching, they are hate watching. And there is a notion that the Mets would be better off as sellers at this year's trade deadline. And a case can be made for that. The Mets did very well selling off a bunch of pieces last year. But I want to make a case for why, as a fan, you should be pulling hard for this team right now. You should be showing up to Citi Field over the next 6 games and trying to have the most fun you can with this season. Because I'll tell you what, the games I went to in D.C., yes, they ended up being great games, but I had a blast just being in the ballpark with my dad, catching some Mets baseball, and just enjoying the atmosphere and the environment that just brings you into your summer when you get to watch some baseball. But there's more to my notion of today's podcast than just talking about the obvious of, hey, you're a fan, root for your team. I believe the Mets can do something special this year. Do I think they're going to win the World Series? No. But I want to tell you a story of the last 2 teams that have made it in the final wildcard spot. Talking about the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, last year, the Diamondbacks were 57-50 at the deadline. They actually got off to a great start to their season. At this point of the year, they were well above 500, but then they really faltered. Coming out of the deadline, they lost 9 games in a row, and they dropped to 57-59 on August 11th. A losing record with a month and a half, maybe a little more than that left to play. Now, they went on to win 11 of 13 to get themselves to 7 games over 500, and they pretty much played 500 baseball all the way down the stretch until their final 4 games, which they lost, but in the midst of that, were able to clinch the final playoff spot. They finished with an 84-78 record. Look at that Diamondbacks roster from last year. Not what we watched them do through the playoffs, but just if you were to tell any fan at the beginning of the playoffs the Diamondbacks would make a run to the World Series, they would have called you insane. And you compare that roster to what the Mets have currently, the Mets have more star players. I don't even think their pitching is that far off. The Diamondbacks went into the last postseason with 2.5 starting pitchers. Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, and Brandon Pfaadt, who did not pitch well in the regular season, and the rookie really came through in the playoffs, but he was pretty much 4 and dive, and they were pulling him. And they had a good enough bullpen, and they just somehow found their way through that playoff run. Crazy things can happen in October. I want to take you to the Phillies. End of May 2022, they are 21-29. Not that different than where the Mets are right now. They were 8 games under 500. 1 game later, after winning the first game in June with Joe Girardi as their manager, they fire him. Here comes Rob Thompson. They win the first 9 games with him as manager, so they were on a 10-game winning streak to begin June, and they rolled from there. They had a 19-8 record in June, 15-10 in July. At that point, they were buyers at the deadline. They get David Robertson. I believe that's when they pulled off the Brandon Marsh trade. It all works out for them. They finish 8 games over. They grab the last wild card spot. They make a run to the World Series, beating the Atlanta Braves along the way. And since then, since June 1st, 2022, the Phillies are 201-138. as the 4th best record in Major League Baseball behind only the Braves, the Dodgers, and the Orioles. There is something to be said about building a winning habit. And you could want the Mets to suck this year so that they can sell off a bunch of pieces. But then are you really going to expect them to go off of 2 horrible seasons and all of a sudden become a winner in 2025? Because as much as you can talk about selling pieces, making trades, all these different things, it's still going to be somewhat the same core next year. It's still going to be Lindor. It's still going to be Nimmo. It's still going to be Edwin Diaz. Still going to be Mark Vientos and Brett Beatty in some capacity, Francisco Alvarez. And unless they pull off a miracle at the deadline, it's probably still going to be Jeff McNeil and Starling Marte. So if you're rooting for bad baseball the rest of this year, don't be surprised if you get it again in 2025. Furthermore, though, anything can happen in October these days, particularly with the current setup. So now I'm going to give you that reason, the one reason where you should be holding out all hope that the New York Mets find their way into the playoffs. I just want to paint a picture for you. There's a team in Atlanta that has lost the reigning MVP and the favorite going into this year for the Cy Young. That's Acuna and Spencer Strider. A team that I'm actually going to write an article today that'll probably be publishing at justbaseball.com some point Tuesday morning about the Atlanta Braves and how they've struggled lately because they've been awful. Now, it's the Braves. They're still, I think, 8 games over. They'll make the playoffs, but it's not quite looking like that same Braves team from the last couple of years. Just imagine if the Mets met the Braves in a 3-game wildcard series. The Braves team that's talked so much about how they hate the playoff format because the team that wins the division is at such a disadvantage. I honestly hope and believe there's some negative karma that's coming the Braves' way for how they've handled those losses. The way Brian Snitker has been so out front talking about how, oh my gosh, it's so unfavorable for us because we win all these games and we have to sit around for a week. And that's where the Phillies beat us, not that the Phillies just been a better team. So now they're going to get their chance to put their money where their mouth is, and they're going to get that wild card treatment most likely. Now, it's probably the first wild card spot, and so the Mets would likely have to grab the second one, but you never know what can happen in a National League that is as close as any you'll see right now, where every team seems to be within 5 games of each other outside of the upper echelon, the Dodgers, the Phillies, and then a step below there, the Braves, and I guess the Brewers too. So I'm just going to say, imagine a world where the New York Mets square off against the Atlanta Braves in a 3-game set. And just like they somehow took a game from the Phillies in London, they would have been on the doorstep of winning a 3-game series, right? They'd be right there in a rubber match game where a big first inning and all of a sudden you're in position. Imagine if your Mets don't even get past the NLDS, but they knock the Braves out of the playoffs. How good that's going to feel as a Mets fan. Imagine you face off against the Brewers in the first round, you win that, and then all of a sudden you're facing the same Phillies team in the NLDS. Just like anything could happen in a 3-game series, same goes for a 5-game series. It's not really until you get to the 7-game series where the best team is more likely than not going to win. And even then, the Phillies were much better than the Diamondbacks last year, and the Diamondbacks won. There is a world where the New York Mets can make the playoffs and make a little bit of noise, and they could embarrass one of their division rivals in the process. And even if they don't, even if this whole thing plays out and the Mets are just short of the playoffs, but they've earned some respect, that's going to hold weight next year when you get into the offseason and you're trying to convince Juan Soto potentially to sign with the Mets, which we'll talk about that at some point this year in the coming weeks. Just why would he ever choose the Mets? And there's only one reason, it's called the money. But it's a lot easier to accept that crazy offer as well if the Mets don't look like as much of a laughingstock. Maybe you want to sign one of these top pitchers. If you want to get into the Corbin Burns business, whatever it is, you are a more attractive destination if you're not a laughable loser for 2 years straight. But that carrot of what could happen in October, to me, it's something to think forward to that should allow you to at least tune in right now, root for your team, and hopefully they can turn this into a season. And if they don't, well, then you talk about selling. but we should not be talking about the Mets trading off pieces on June 11th. We should wait until July 21st. If that's where they're at, that's what we'll do. But for now, we're talking about this team like a contender. I want to break down what they could do going forward to be better and to actually be able to make this type of a climb out from under 500 and into the wild card race. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment, why there should be a little bit of hope going into this next homestand. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies and more. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, just add your offers in the app, upload your receipt, and you get real cash that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Join the over 50 million savers and earn cash back every time you shop from over 2,700 retailers and brands, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. And right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Ibotta, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members, is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than on 2 or more player stats, and you watch the winnings roll in. Today, you can look at Francisco Lindor, and his runs has been set at 0.5. So Francisco Lindor scores a run, you pick more. That is one part of your entry that you're going to win on. Tyler McGill, strikeout set at 5. I'd take more there as well. The Marlins are going to strike out a lot tonight. And Pete Alonso, you can look at his hits plus runs plus RBIs at 1.5. If he just gets a knock and scores a run, you're there. That's all you need. Those 3 things happen on your entry. You can win big. You can also cross over with different sports. So you could take a Mets player and someone in the NBA Finals or in the Stanley Cup Finals, and you can combine them all in one entry. You can even look at WNBA and so much more. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the NBA and the Stanley Cup Finals, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, why should you believe in the New York Mets? It's a small sample size, but over the last 15 days and 12 games, the Mets have the 4th highest OPS in all of baseball. You look at the stats over that time. We look at WRC plus. It's weighted runs created plus. It tells you what a hitter is based on a league average of 100. From the Mets starting lineup, you have Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Starling Marte, Mark Vientos, JD Martinez, all of which have been well above average. You got Lindor, he's got a 183 WRC plus. He's hitting 340. You got Luis Torrens, I didn't mention yet. He's hitting 313 in his first 18 plate appearances, 219 WRC plus. You got Pete Alonso hitting 286, 388 on base, 548 slug, 170 WRC plus. Starling Marte, over his last 9 games played, is hitting 414, 204 WRC plus. Mark Vientos hitting 308, 139 WRC plus. Jose Iglesias coming onto the scenes, hitting 409, 174 WRC plus. Even Tomas Nido is slugging to a 471 clip and has a 128 WRC plus in his playing time. And then you got JD Martinez in 261, 333, 478 when it comes to the slug there. 135 WRC plus. He has been solid, and I still think there's room for JD Martinez to be better. The guys that have been below average, you got DJ Stewart, you got Jeff McNeil, Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader, Brett Beatty, and Brandon Nimmo, who really needs to snap out of it a little bit. I did have one of the Locked On Mets insiders that was texting me. I think it was an insider, unless it was someone on Twitter. But regardless, someone reached out, asked me to look into if it's something that relates to when he got hit in the face. And I will say there is a slight spike in strikeout rate. But at the same time, you look at what he's done this month, it's sort of the production we've gotten all year. The slug has gone away a little bit. I don't know if that's affecting Brandon Nimmo. I honestly don't. Looking at his numbers in the 3-hole, it hasn't been great. That's been the sort of give and take that you've had with, Francisco Lindor really taking to batting first. But you look at what Nimmo has done, it just hasn't been great in that 3-hole. So you wonder if part of that is not being comfortable in that spot, or maybe there's, just a general slump that he's in. Regardless, Nimmo should be better at some point. He'll either figure out batting third, or maybe the Mets go back to the original lineup. They say Lindor is swinging it well enough that he can go back to his 3-hole driving runs. Nimmo can lead off, but I'm not going to be overly concerned about Brandon Nimmo still, because the batted ball data still tells us he's hitting the ball hard and results should follow. I really believe that this team, now that they have added Torrens to the mix, Iglesias, and to get Francisco Alvarez back potentially later tonight, I think that this group can believe in each other and they can put up runs. Here's where I'm not as convinced that this Mets team can make a run. They're 26th in ERA during that same span we've been talking about. They got to pitch better. Now you look at how those runs came across against Mets pitching. Jorge Lopez owns 4 of them. He had an ERA of 27 before he got dropped during this span that we're talking about. Adam Ottavino has been abysmal. 7 earned runs in 5 appearances. He's been really bad. Shaw Manaea, 11 earned runs over his last 2 starts. Josh Walker, 5 earned runs in 4 2/3 before getting sent down. Reed Garrett, 4 earned runs in 5 2/3. Jose Quintana, 9 earned runs in his last 3 starts without covering a lot of innings. Sean Reed-Foley and Jake Diekman have just been okay. They've each allowed 2 runs apiece. But I feel like each of them has given us some inherited runs on top of that. And then you look at the bright spots. Okay, so can the bright spots outshine the warts, and could the warts get better? Luis Severino, David Peterson, and Tyler McGill over this last couple of weeks span, they've all pitched to a sub 3.4 ERA, and I think that can continue. Danny Young and Daniel Nunez have each allowed just 1 earned run, and that's combined across 11 appearances between the 2 of them. That's been impressive. Adrian Hauser has turned into a plus pitcher out of the bullpen, sporting an ERA of 0 in his last 7 innings pitched. So if you believe that David Stearns can find his way to a good bullpen again, all right, there's some optimism that this Mets team can figure some things out. I have my questions about both Quintana and Manaea, the 2 lefties in this rotation. But if Christian Scott comes up at some point, that could assuage some of that, right? That can add another start into the fold that does really well. And who knows, maybe you remove one of those other guys, particularly Quintana, when you make that move. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. But I look at the road ahead for the New York Mets. This lineup is good. I honestly think offensively they're going to put runs on the board. Can they pitch? Well, this upcoming series, who do you have going? You got McGill, Peterson, Severino, the part of the rotation that I have faith in. You're coming off of a great series in DC and a huge emotional victory over the Phillies. Now you do have to shake off the rust of what Francisco Lindor described as almost an all-star break. Now you got to figure out and get back into the grind of a season. But you have the Marlins waiting for you. And you have a homestand here, and the Mets have to play better at home. You have the Marlins and the Padres. Then you go to Texas for 3 against the Rangers. Then you have a pair of off days sandwiched between a 3-game series in Wrigley against the Cubs. Then you have a 5-game homestand, 2 against the Yankees, 3 against the Astros. And that puts a close on the book of June here. 17 games ahead this month. Then you get to the cakewalk that is the beginning of July, which, hey, it's never really a cakewalk in baseball, but that is your opportunity to make serious ground in the wild card race when you're playing the Nationals, the Pirates, the Nationals again, the Rockies, and then after the All-Star break, the Marlins. It's a stretch of 18 games against some of the worst teams in the National League. So that's where you can make your run if you can hold your head above water, and you're getting both Edwin Diaz and Francisco Alvarez back potentially as soon as tonight. I want to talk about that next. I want to preview Mets versus Marlins and what those 2 players can bring to the table to help lift this team even further. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and so much more. You can bet on all of it at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you want to bet on the NBA Finals, you want to bet on the Stanley Cup Finals, if you want to just take the Mets to beat the Marlins, so you place $5 there, you win that. You get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed that you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. You can just take Pete Alonso, hit a home run with your bonus bets. And if he does, you win big. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to place that $5 bet for $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Again, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're an everyday listener to this show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you can ask me questions anytime. You get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You also get to take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. I think I'm going to actually do another one this week, but only the insiders will hear about it. So if you want to be part of our Locked On Mets insider community, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/lockedonmets. Now, let's go over this upcoming series, Mets versus Marlins. The Marlins, let me check because I prepped my series preview before Monday here. I don't believe they actually did play, which would hold up. Yes, they last played on Sunday, so they are still 21 games under 500. They are 3-7 in their last 10 games played. This is not a good baseball team. The Mets need to take advantage of this opportunity. They got Jesus Luzardo going game one, though. That could always be a tough matchup. You look at his season stats, he's been struggling, but it's still Jesus Luzardo, a guy that can be really tough on you coming from the left side. He's going up against Tyler McGill. They got Braxton Garrett, who's also been struggling, versus David Peterson. I've seen Garrett have some really good starts as well, but it's been a slog for him lately. And then you got Rodri Munoz, or did I spell that wrong? I got two N's before a Z in his name. Let me see if I got this wrong. Yeah, I did completely butcher the spelling. It's Rodri Munoz, who has been inserted into the Marlins rotation, has not done well up to this point. All three starters for the Marlins carry an ERA over 5 going into this series. And Munoz, not Munoz, man, that's a bad spelling mistake. Munoz will go up against Luis Severino, the Mets ace. So if you get it there to that final game and it's a rubber match, Sevy should be able to take it there just like he did against the Nationals, although that was actually setting him up to complete a sweep, and he did just that. This is a series where the Mets can start to hopefully rewrite the narrative that has been a season where they have honestly just sucked when they played at home. This is your chance to start to change that, and then you play a much tougher team over the weekend in the Padres. So this is a very important series for the Mets to continue this momentum that they've had over this past week and turn it into something. So we'll see what they do with it. And they get an emotional lift as well by getting both Alvarez and Diaz back. At least that's what we think is going to happen. Alvarez returned from dealing with some family matters in Venezuela to play a game on Sunday. I think he was 0 for 5, but regardless, he played the entire game in Brooklyn. He caught Edwin Diaz, who had another solid inning. So Diaz looks ready to go. I think Alvarez is ready to go. And that's going to make your team that much better. I think Alvarez makes your pitching staff better. The combination of Alvarez and Torrens, to me, looks like the best tandem of catchers the Mets have had in a very long time. Obviously, with Torrens, we're looking at a very short sample size where he's put this up. But what he's done with his arm, the double play that he made, and the more you think about that double play he turned to end the London series, ridiculously good play. One that might be talked about for years to come. Who knows? It just might be one of those random footnotes, but man, that was special. And Alvarez is the guy for the future. So to have these guys guiding your pitching staff, I think that's going to make that part of your team just that much better, hopefully. And again, I don't think you can really discount what it's going to feel like to have Alvarez's smiling face in that dugout, not just to be visiting while he's hurt, but to actually be ready to contribute and lead. Because I think the crazy thing about Francisco Alvarez, despite how young he is, I think he's one of the best leaders on the New York Mets. So I really believe that's going to be huge. And Edwin Diaz, I mean, if Diaz can just be the guy that he was at the beginning of the season, it doesn't have to be 2022 Edwin. If he's just the guy he was to start the year, the Mets bullpen will be that much better. And they were great when Diaz was pitching at that level. And it sets everybody into roles where all of a sudden Reed Garrett's not pitching in 9th innings. You don't have to put that pressure on Adam Ottavino. It clears things up. It sets a natural pecking order. And I imagine he's going to return off the IL and immediately have the closer's job. I don't think that you go back to closer by committee and protecting him. No, you say, all right, Edwin, your shoulder was bothering you. You went on rehab. You feel good. You're the guy again. And if he can prove to be that, that's just going to make everybody else better in that bullpen. But I mentioned wanting to talk about Jose Quintana and Christian Scott earlier, right? So let's just talk about that because roster moves had to be made for Alvarez and Diaz to come back. I believe Tomas Nido is going to see his very long tenure with this organization end because Luis Torrens has taken that backup catcher job. And Nido played better baseball this year than I think he ever has in a Mets uniform. So it's really unfortunate. But unless Torrens, who did have a little bit of a collision on that double play at the plate, unless he came out of that banged up and ends up on the IL, I think he's going to stay. You'll DFA Nido. And there's been some debate about this, but I think it was Mike Puma who tweeted it out today that Nido does have enough service time that he can refuse an assignment to Syracuse if he clears waivers, elect free agency, and collect his salary. So there is a world where Nido does not stay in the organization if they DFA him. He's honestly played well enough that I think another team might just outright claim him, and then there'll be like a trade of cash. But there is a good shot here that regardless of what happens with waivers, he might decide to go elsewhere and try to find a place where he can hopefully get a path to playing time. So I think that's the easy roster move. The more difficult one is what do you do to get Edwin Diaz back in the bullpen? Now, Daniel Nunez and Danny Young have been great. They've been some of your better pitchers over the past week and a half here. They have been the guys that you can count on a little bit. So are you really going to option them just because they have the optionality? I hope not. So if you don't do that, what is the move? Would you DFA Sean Reed-Foley? Would you DFA Drew Smith? Or would you get really crazy and DFA Adam Ottavino? Adam Ottavino, over this recent stretch, his last 5 games pitched, batters are hitting .471 against him. He has a whip over 3. Whip is walks and hits over innings pitched. So if you have a reliever that has a whip of 3 over a period of time, that means when he's been on the mound, he's given up at least 3 base runners. That's bad. That is of merit to be DFA'd. Now, he's one of the Mets' most established relievers. He's getting paid a decent amount of money. Would they actually do that? Would they get rid of the guy that's struggling the most despite the track record? I don't think so. So then it goes back to Smith or Foley. But Foley's pitched pretty well this year. And Drew Smith is a guy that has pretty good stuff. Here's the outside of the box move that I don't know if the Mets would have the guts to do, but with this front office, I can't rule it out. What if they DFA Jose Quintana? Just throwing it out there. Now, Quintana has not pitched well lately. He doesn't have great stuff. And if you told me in a vacuum who is a better bet right now to go out and give you 6 scoreless, Jose Quintana or Jose Budo, I'm taking Budo every time. And that's not even the guy that would replace him. It would be Christian Scott in the interim. And when you get to a 6-man rotation, that's when it would be Budo. Christian Scott could return on Saturday. And this is a complete conspiracy theory. You can never read too much into the announced starters at MLB.com. But if you wanted to, you have the 3 I mentioned for this series, and Sean Manaea is already listed to start the first game of the Padres series. Okay. They could announce Quintana now, but he is not listed. Christian Scott can return off the IL on June 15th, Saturday. Second game of that series against the Padres. So let's say you insert Christian Scott in the rotation, and you had DFA'd Quintana before that. The Mets could run a 5-man rotation of McGill, Peterson, Severino, Manaea, and Christian Scott, and pretty much carry them through the month of June with the off days that the Mets have, keeping Scott on 5 days rest the whole time. Then you get to a stretch that begins at the end of June that carries through the All-Star break, where the Mets will play 17 games in 17 days, and you would need a couple spot starters or a 6-man for that stretch. But with the amount of relievers the Mets have to go to a 6-man rotation, now all of a sudden you got to DFA 2 guys. Or you got to option one of or both of Nunez or Young, who've been huge for you. So instead of DFAing Ottavino, Sean Reed-Foley, or Drew Smith, you could DFA Jose Quintana, have a 9-man bullpen for the upcoming series against the Marlins and the beginning of the series against the Padres. Then you make the move to add Christian Scott, and you DFA whichever pitcher is struggling, whichever one you decide when it comes to the relievers, and you still can have an 8-man bullpen and a 5-man rotation to get you through the month of June. And you remove your worst starting pitcher and insert Christian Scott. If the Mets were serious about winning this year, that would be the move they make on Tuesday. I don't know if they have the stones to do it because they didn't cut bait on Adrian Hauser when he had his great struggles, and they've been proven right on that. Hauser has been a valued pitcher out of the pen. But I don't see Quintana as the guy that's going to pitch out of the bullpen. So, and I don't necessarily want to see that either. And a 6-man rotation is going to make you so very thin in that bullpen, unless you work into some scenario where you have David Peterson and Hauser each pitching out of the bullpen, and they're making occasional spot starts, which is a scenario I can see the Mets going down. But Peterson looks like a value to this rotation right now. So that's the tough decision for the Mets. When they make this move with Edwin Diaz, they could just take the easy route, DFA a pitcher, or option one of Young or Nunez, or technically Reed Garrett, but I doubt they do that. Maybe someone ends up hurt. Maybe Adam Ottavino has shoulder impingement like Edwin Diaz did, and you flip their shoulders for each other, and you send Ottavino away for a couple weeks, and you see what happens down the road. Who knows? But the New York Mets have some decisions to make here, and I'm very curious what the plan is with Christian Scott and what the plan is with a 5-man or a 6-man rotation, how they carry that this month if Scott does come back, and how long do they have the stomach for sending Jose Quintana out there where he's not making it through 4 innings. We'll see. That's going to be all, though, for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Of course, I'll be breaking down the first game of Mets versus Marlins and more on tomorrow's show. We might do a deeper dive into Nimmo with his struggles in the 3-hole. I still plan on doing that at some point this week. So make sure you tune into that. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to make a push to 9,000 subs, so I appreciate all of you continue to subscribe. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube. Check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today, where you can get all of your latest on the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, and more. Check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.